He looked like any other lonely rancher. Weathered hands, tired eyes, just trying to mind his own business in town. But when Boone Whitley saw the girl tied to that wagon, everything changed. Because what he thought was a simple act of mercy was about to uncover a conspiracy that would put both their lives in mortal danger. The rope burns on her wrist told a story no decent person should ignore. Cora sat bound to the wagon wheel like livestock, her torn dress barely covering her trembling frame. The auctioneer's voice cut through the dusty air of the town square, calling for bids on quality help for any household. But this wasn't about housework. Everyone knew what happened to girls sold this way. Boone's jaw tightened as he watched respectable townspeople walk past, averting their eyes. He'd come to town for supplies, nothing more. His ranch needed fence posts and grain, not complications. But something about the way the girl held her head high despite her circumstances stirred memories he'd tried to bury. His own daughter would have been about her age now, if the fever hadn't taken her 5 winters back. "What's your starting bid for this one?" Malachi Cross stepped forward, his gold teeth catching the morning light. The man's expensive suit couldn't hide what he really was. Boone had heard the whispers about Cross's business ventures, young women who disappeared into his employment and were never seen again. The girl's eyes found Boone's across the crowd. No pleading, no tears, just a steady gaze that seemed to say she'd rather die fighting than surrender to whatever fate awaited her. That look decided everything. $50. Boone's voice carried across the square. Cross turned, his smile sharp as a blade. "Well now, Whitley, didn't take you for the type to need companionship." The insult hung in the air like smoke. Boone felt every eye in the square on him, whispers spreading through the crowd. But he'd lived alone long enough to stop caring what people thought. 60. 100. Cross's bid came quick and confident. Boone's heart pounded. $100 was nearly everything he had. His ranch was barely scraping by and winter was coming. But that girl's steady gaze never wavered, and something in her reminded him of everything he'd lost, everything he'd failed to protect before. 120. The words left his mouth before he could stop them. Cross studied him for a long moment, then shrugged. "Enjoy your purchase, Whitley. Just remember, some things are more trouble than they're worth." The auctioneer's gavel fell, sealing the deal. Boone approached the wagon, fumbling for his knife to cut her bonds. But as he knelt beside her, the girl's whispered words made his blood run cold. "He'll kill us both for this. You have no idea what you just bought." The rope fell away from her wrists, but Cora didn't move. She sat rigid against the wagon wheel, watching Boone with the wariness of a cornered animal. Blood seeped through the fabric where the bonds had cut into her skin, but she made no sound of pain. "Can you stand?" Boone kept his voice gentle, the way he used to speak to his daughter after her nightmares. "Why?" The single word carried years of betrayal. "What do you want from me?" The question hit him harder than he expected. What did he want? To ease his conscience? To fill the emptiness that had consumed his ranch since his family died? He honestly didn't know. "To get you somewhere safe." He offered his hand, but she didn't take it. "Safe." She laughed, but there was no humor in it. "I haven't been safe since my father died 3 months ago." Boone noticed how she said it. Not passed away or fell ill, but died. Like there was more to that story. But before he could ask, she struggled to her feet alone, swaying slightly from exhaustion. The crowd was dispersing, but Malachi Cross lingered near his own carriage, watching them with those cold eyes. Boone felt the weight of that stare like a rifle aimed at his back. "We need to leave. Now." Cora's urgency surprised him. Boone helped her into his wagon, noticing how she flinched at every sudden movement. Whatever she'd endured before today had left deeper scars than the rope burns. As they rolled out of town, he saw Cross climb into his carriage and follow at a distance. "Tell me your name," Boone said, keeping his eyes on the road ahead. "Cora." She paused as if deciding whether to trust him with more. "Cora Langley." The name meant nothing to him, but the way she said it suggested it should, like it carried weight he couldn't understand. They rode in silence for miles, the only sounds the creaking wagon and horse hooves on packed earth. Boone's ranch sat in a valley between 2 hills, isolated enough that visitors were rare. It had been a blessing when he wanted to grieve alone. Now he wondered if that isolation would protect her, or trap them both. "Why did you buy me?" Cora asked as his cabin came into view. Boone considered the question. The honest answer was too complicated, too tangled up with his own losses. Because nobody else should have that kind of power over another person. Even though I warned you it would get us killed? Especially then, for the first time, something that might have been a smile crossed her face, but it vanished quickly when she looked back down the trail they'd traveled. He's still following us, she said quietly. Boone didn't need to look back to know she was right. He could feel Cross's presence like a storm on the horizon. Whatever secret Cora carried, whatever reason Cross wanted her so badly, it was bigger than a simple business transaction. As they approached his cabin, Cora suddenly stiffened. Her hand moved instinctively to her dress pocket, pressing against something hidden there. "What is it?" Boone asked. But before she could answer, the sound of approaching hoofbeats echoed across the valley. Cross hadn't just been following, he'd brought friends. 3 riders emerged from the dust cloud, their faces hard as the pistols on their hips. Malachi Cross rode in the center, his gold teeth glinting in a smile that promised violence. Boone's hand moved instinctively toward his rifle, but Cora grabbed his wrist. "Don't," she whispered. "He wants an excuse." Cross reined in his horse 20 feet from the wagon, close enough to talk, far enough to draw and fire if needed. His men spread out to flank them, hands resting on their gun handles. "Whitley, you've got something that doesn't belong to you." Cross's voice carried the confidence of a man who'd never been told no. "I paid fair and square, got the papers to prove it." Boone kept his voice steady, but his heart hammered against his ribs. "See, that's where you're wrong." Cross dismounted slowly, deliberately. "That girl there, she's wanted for theft. Stole something valuable from her last employer before she ran off." Cora's grip on Boone's wrist tightened. He could feel her trembling, but when he glanced at her, her face showed only defiance. "What did she supposedly steal?" Boone asked. "Family documents, property deeds, things that don't belong to orphaned girls with sticky fingers." Cross took a step closer. "Now, I'm a reasonable man. Hand her over, and I'll even refund half your money. Keep her and, well, harboring a thief is a serious crime out here." The threat hung in the air like smoke from a gun barrel. Boone knew Cross was lying. Everything about this felt wrong. But 3 armed men against 1 farmer weren't good odds, especially with Cora caught in the middle. "I need proof of these charges," Boone said, buying time while he calculated distances to his cabin, to cover, to anywhere that might offer protection. Cross laughed, a sound like grinding metal. "Proof? Out here?" He gestured to the empty valley around them. "I am the proof, Whitley. I'm the law when the sheriff's 50 miles away." That's when Cora stood up in the wagon seat. Her fear transformed into something fiercer. "Tell him about my father, Malachi. Tell him how family documents got stolen." The use of Cross's first name surprised everyone, including his men. Cross's confident smile faltered for just a moment before returning, but there was something different in his eyes now. Something like recognition and fear. "Your father was a drunk and a debtor," Cross said, but his voice had lost its certainty. "He sold you to pay what he owed. My father was murdered for what he wouldn't sell." Cora's voice carried across the valley like a gunshot. "And you know it because you're the one who killed him." The accusation exploded between them like dynamite. Cross's men exchanged glances, hands moving closer to their weapons. But Cross himself went very still, the mask of civility finally slipping away. "Careful, girl. Dead men tell no tales, but neither do dead girls." That's when Cora reached into her dress pocket and pulled out a folded paper, yellowed with age but intact. Maybe not, but their wills do. The paper in Cora's hand seemed to change everything. Cross's face went pale beneath his tan, and his men shifted nervously in their saddles. Whatever was written on that document, it was worth killing for. "That's impossible," Cross said, but his voice cracked like thin ice. "I searched everything, every pocket, every hiding place." "You searched my father's house," Cora said, her voice steady as stone. "But you never thought to look in his daughter's dress. He sewed it into the lining the night before you murdered him." Boone felt the pieces clicking together like bullets sliding into a chamber. This wasn't about a runaway servant or stolen property. This was about land, money, and murder. And he was caught in the middle of it. "What's that paper say?" Boone asked, never taking his eyes off Cross's men. Cora unfolded the document carefully, as if it might crumble at her touch. "Last will and testament of Jonas Langley. All property, including the Northern Valley grazing lands and water rights, to be inherited by his daughter, Cora Langley, upon his death." The words hit Cross like physical blows. The Northern Valley was the richest grazing land in the territory, with a creek that ran year-round. Whoever controlled that water controlled everything. "Those lands belong to me now," Cross snarled. "I bought them fair and square after your father's debts came due." "From who?" Cora's question was sharp as a blade. "Who signed the deed transfer? Because according to this will, only I could sell them. And I never did." Cross's jaw worked like he was chewing leather. His right hand moved toward his gun, and Boone tensed, ready to throw himself between Cora and the bullets that were about to fly. But then Cora did something unexpected. She ripped the will in half. "What are you doing?" Boone shouted, but she was already tearing it into smaller pieces, letting them flutter to the ground like dead leaves. Cross's eyes went wide with confusion and rage. "You little fool. You just destroyed the only proof you had." "No," Cora smiled, and for the first time since Boone had met her, it reached her eyes. "I destroyed a copy." The revelation hung in the air like thunder before lightning. Cross's face twisted with fury as he realized he'd been outsmarted by a 19-year-old girl. "My father was careful," Cora continued. "He filed the original will with Judge Harrison in the county seat 3 weeks before he died. That paper was just insurance, in case something happened to me too." Cross drew his gun in one smooth motion, but Boone was faster. He grabbed Cora and pulled her down into the wagon bed just as the first shot rang out. The bullet splintered the wooden seat where her head had been a second before. "Take them alive if you can," Cross shouted to his men. "But take them either way. We can't let them reach the judge." 2 more shots cracked across the valley. Boone's horse screamed and bolted, the wagon lurching forward toward his cabin. But they were still 200 yards from cover, and Cross's men were already spurring their horses in pursuit. Cora pressed something small and hard into Boone's hand. He looked down to see a brass key, warm from being hidden against her skin. "If something happens to me," she said, "there's a strongbox buried under the oak tree behind your cabin. Everything you need to know is in there." "Nothing's going to happen to you," Boone said. But even as the words left his mouth, he could hear the hoofbeats getting closer. The runaway wagon bounced and careened toward Boone's cabin, but their pursuers were gaining ground fast. Boone could hear Cross shouting orders behind them, his voice sharp with desperation. A man who killed for land wouldn't hesitate to kill again to keep his secret buried. "The cabin won't hold them," Boone said, yanking on the reins to slow their panicked horse. "Too many windows, too many ways in. Then we don't go to the cabin." Cora pointed toward a rocky outcrop beyond his property. "Those boulders. We can make a stand there." Boone had hunted deer in those rocks for years. Good cover, high ground, and only one way up. But it would also trap them if Cross decided to wait them out. Still, it beat dying in the open. He steered the wagon toward the rocks just as another shot rang out. This one caught the wagon's side, sending splinters flying. The horse stumbled but kept running, fear driving it harder than any whip. They reached the base of the outcrop with 50 yards to spare. Boone grabbed his rifle and ammunition while Cora clutched the brass key like a lifeline. Together they scrambled up the narrow path between the boulders, loose stones sliding under their feet. From the top, Boone could see Cross and his men spreading out in a rough circle around the rocks. They had all the time in the world. He and Cora had whatever ammunition he'd brought to town that morning. "How many bullets?" Cora asked, reading his thoughts. "Maybe 20. You ever handle a gun?" "My father taught me to shoot rabbits." She tried to smile, but her hands were shaking. "I don't think men are much different." Below them, Cross dismounted and cupped his hands around his mouth. "Whitley, this doesn't have to end badly for you. Just send the girl down, and you can walk away from this." Boone didn't bother answering. They both knew Cross couldn't leave any witnesses alive, not with murder hanging over his head. "What was your father really like?" Boone asked, checking his rifle's action. If these were his last moments, he wanted to know who he was dying for. "Stubborn as a mule," Cora said, and this time her smile was real. "Said the land was meant to be shared, not hoarded. Cross offered him 5 times what it was worth, but father wouldn't sell. Said water belonged to everyone, not just the highest bidder." That explained everything. In a territory where water meant life or death, controlling the Northern Valley Creek made Cross richer than a king. And killing one stubborn rancher was a small price to pay for that kind of power. "There," one of Cross's men pointed toward the rocks. "I see movement up there." The first bullet struck the boulder inches from Boone's head, showering him with stone chips. The siege had begun, and they both knew how it would end. But as Boone took aim at the men below, Cora grabbed his arm one more time. "Promise me something," she said. "If I don't make it out of here, don't let him win. Make sure that will reach Judge Harrison." Boone looked into her eyes and saw his own daughter's courage reflected there. "We're both getting out of here, together." The gunfight lasted through the afternoon like a deadly game of cat and mouse. Cross's men would move position, Boone would fire to keep them back, and they'd retreat to plan their next approach. But ammunition was running low and everyone knew it. 8 bullets left, Boone whispered, counting cartridges for the 3rd time. Cora had proven surprisingly steady under fire, loading and spotting targets while he aimed. But as the sun began to sink toward the horizon, their situation grew more desperate. Cross was patient, content to wait for darkness when his men could climb the rocks unseen. "I need to tell you something," Cora said during a lull in the shooting. "About that strongbox I mentioned. Save it for when we're safe. We might not get that chance." She pressed the brass key into his palm again. "My father didn't just file one will with Judge Harrison. He filed 3 copies with 3 different judges, in 3 different counties. Cross can't kill them all." The revelation hit Boone like cold water. "Why didn't you tell Cross that?" "Because he would have tortured the information out of me, then killed us both anyway." Cora's voice was steady, but her hands trembled as she reloaded the rifle. "This way, he thinks eliminating Judge Harrison solves his problem." Below them, Cross was growing impatient. Boone could hear him arguing with his men, voices rising in frustration. Whatever plan they'd hatched wasn't working fast enough. That's when the unexpected happened. New riders appeared on the horizon, their dust cloud visible even in the fading light. Cross's men turned to look, hands moving to their weapons. But these weren't reinforcements. The lead rider carried a glinting badge on his chest. "That's Sheriff Dawson," Cora breathed, hope creeping into her voice for the first time all day. Cross saw the sheriff too, and his composure finally cracked. He started shouting orders at his men, pointing toward escape routes. But the sheriff wasn't alone. 6 riders with him, all armed, all determined. "Cross!" Sheriff Dawson's voice boomed across the valley. "Step away from those rocks with your hands visible." What happened next unfolded like dominoes falling. Cross drew his gun, but instead of aiming at the sheriff, he turned toward the rocks. If he couldn't have Cora alive, he'd make sure she died with his secrets. But Boone was ready. His rifle cracked once, and Cross spun backward, clutching his shoulder. The shot that would have killed Cora instead shattered harmlessly against stone. Cross's men, seeing their leader wounded and outnumbered, threw down their weapons. The fight was over, but Cross himself wasn't finished. Bleeding and desperate, he stumbled toward his horse, trying to escape before the sheriff could reach him. "He's getting away!" Cora started to stand, but Boone pulled her back down. "Let him go. He won't get far with that wound." But Cross surprised them all. Instead of fleeing, he turned back toward the rocks, his good arm raising a pistol. His face was twisted with rage and desperation, a man who'd lost everything and wanted to take someone with him. The shot echoed across the valley. But it wasn't Cross who fired. Sheriff Dawson's rifle smoked in the evening air, and Malachi Cross crumpled to the ground like a broken puppet. The man who'd murdered Jonas Langley and tried to steal his daughter's inheritance lay still in the dust, his gold teeth catching the last rays of sunlight. "It's over," Boone said. But even as he spoke the words, he wondered if that was really true. Cross was dead, but his conspirators might still be out there, and Cora's inheritance was still in danger. As they climbed down from the rocks, Cora clutched the brass key one more time. "There's something else in that strongbox," she said quietly. "Something that proves Cross wasn't working alone." Sheriff Dawson proved to be a thorough man. While his deputies secured Cross's men, he listened to Cora's story with the patience of someone who'd seen too much corruption to be surprised by anything. The brass key gleamed in the firelight from Boone's cabin as Cora explained about the strongbox. "Your father was smart to contact me before he died," Dawson said, accepting a cup of coffee from Boone. "His letter reached me yesterday, along with Judge Harrison's telegram about the will. Took me this long to gather enough men to face Cross properly." They found the strongbox exactly where Cora had said it would be, buried beneath the gnarled oak tree behind Boone's cabin. Inside, wrapped in oiled cloth, were documents that painted a picture of corruption, reaching far beyond one greedy land grabber. "Bank records," Sheriff Dawson read aloud, holding papers close to the lantern light, showing payments from Cross to Judge Martinez and Mayor Richardson. "Your father documented everything." Cora sat beside Boone on his porch steps, exhaustion finally claiming her now that the danger had passed. He knew they'd come for him eventually. Said if anything happened, the truth needed to survive even if he didn't. The documents revealed a conspiracy that had been years in the making. Cross hadn't just targeted the Langley land, he'd been systematically driving out small ranchers throughout the territory, using corrupt officials to legitimize his thefts. Jonas Langley had been the one man stubborn enough to investigate and document the entire operation. "This evidence will put half the territorial government in prison," Dawson said, carefully folding the papers. "Your father's murder just became the key to cleaning up this whole mess." As dawn broke over the valley, the last of Cross's men were loaded into the sheriff's wagon for transport to the county jail. Cora stood at the edge of Boone's property, looking out over the rolling hills that now belonged to her. "It's a lot of land for one person to manage," she said quietly. Boone joined her, studying the endless grass and the creek that sparkled in the morning light. "Your father was right about water belonging to everyone. Place this size could support a dozen families if it was managed right." "I was thinking the same thing." Cora turned to face him, and he saw something new in her eyes. Not just gratitude, but possibility. "I don't know much about running a ranch, but I know about keeping books and managing accounts. And you know about cattle and land." The partnership she was suggesting made practical sense, but Boone heard something deeper in her words. After years of isolation and grief, the idea of sharing his life again felt both terrifying and necessary. "Your father would be proud," he said finally. "You saved more than just his land today." Cora smiled, the first truly peaceful expression he'd seen on her face. "He always said the best legacies aren't what we leave behind, but what we build together." 6 months later, the Northern Valley thrived under their joint management. Families settled on parcels of land with guaranteed water rights, children played by the creek that had once been fought over, and the conspiracy that had poisoned the territory was finally broken. Boone never forgot the moment he'd first seen Cora tied to that wagon, but he'd learned that sometimes the most important purchases aren't made with money. They're made with courage, compassion, and the willingness to fight for what's right. The lonely rancher had found more than just his conscience that day in town. He'd found his family, his purpose, and proof that some things in life are worth every risk. If you enjoyed this story of justice and redemption in the Old West, please consider subscribing to our channel and supporting us with a super chat. Your support helps us bring more untold stories of courage and humanity to life. Thank you for joining us on this journey. Click on the next video to discover another tale of unexpected heroes and hidden truths from the American frontier.